Okay, hello, good morning everybody. My name is Rick Heikoop. I'm a lecturer water management at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. And today I want to present to you an analysis of the different master courses that were submitted to the LeanCC website. Now, first I want to do a short agenda, the objective of the presentation, the background of climate change education in the EU and the current needs, a review of the submitted EU Masters on Climate Change and Sustainability as they were submitted to the LeanCC website. And last, we have a little time for conclusion and discussion. Okay, about 112 courses were submitted to the LeanCC website. And the question is, do they cover the current needs of the European Union? So that's what I want to discuss with you today. Given the fact that climate change has arrived in many parts of the world, so we have to see if our courses, if our education in the European Union and also other countries in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world actually do cover the needs of our world today and the needs of climate change. Well, I checked the different master courses. I checked if there were also the geographical background of the different courses. And secondly, I also checked if these courses were standalone, meaning only focusing on climate change, or if there were mainstream courses, more intersectoral approach in the different courses. Before we go to the different courses, I want to give you a little bit background about the EU needs of climate change. In 2009, the EU white paper on adaptation strategy was published. And one of the key deliveries was the Climate Adapt platform. That is a website, and it is a tool for governments and local governments to develop their own adaptation strategy. And now, 2 months ago, the EU strategy on adaptation to climate change was published, and we found out that only 50 member states of 28 have adopted an adaptation strategy. So that means not all members of the European Union actually developed an adaptation strategy. And if we're talking about cities, more than half the world population is living in cities, and about 70% of that urban population is living in delta cities and coastal cities, which are extremely vulnerable for climate change. So I think there's an urgent need for adaptation strategies. Adaptation is in most cases still at an early stage with relatively few concrete measures on the ground, meaning that little action has been taken by governments and local governments for adaptation on the ground in our cities where we live. So I think the urgency is very high. Okay, what are the knowledge gaps? As mentioned in the EU strategy, information on damage and adaptation costs and benefits are lacking. So this is something that our courses, which our course should integrate in our courses. Regional and local level analysis and risk assessments are lacking. Frameworks, models and tools to support decision making and to assess how effective the various adaptation measures are also lacking. And means of monitoring and evaluating past adaptation efforts are also lacking. So we are taking measures, we're doing something, but actually we cannot really assess if those projects are really helpful. Now, in the same way, indicators and monitoring methodologies have hardly been developed. That's also really a task for us as universities. And given the uncertainties of climate change, yeah, we do not really, we cannot establish the adaptation needs of our cities. So adaptation needs are also really, they're unknown. So before we go to the climate change courses, I want to show you the climate change adaptation platform, which was developed by the European Union and which was online in 2012. And it's really a tool for governments and local governments to develop a local adaptation strategy. Yeah, it's a useful tool for all practitioners, also for students, to learn how to adapt to climate change. If you go to the website, which I will not do at this moment, you can see there are many links to different documents and strategies on climate change adaptations. Now you can see there are 6 steps to reach your adaptation strategy, how to assess your risk and vulnerability to climate change, how to identify adaptation options, how to assess the different adaptation options. So I think we really should integrate this in our different climate change courses. Okay, now the master courses that were submitted to the Lean CC website, in total about 86 universities submitted their 1 or more climate change courses, and as we can see from this statistics, we see that England, United Kingdom, has the most courses, or submitted the most courses in English. Netherlands, Sweden, Scotland, we can see many courses, many countries offer climate change courses in English. But of course there could be much more courses than only submitted to this website. Now if you look at the topics that these courses offer, we see that most of the courses, they focus on sustainable development and environmental management, while other courses, they focus on climate change and sustainability and law, climate change and agriculture. We have some standalone courses only on climate change. We have climate change and health. So we have different teams, and we can see that there are different climate change is approached from different angles in different courses. Now looking if there are standalone courses or mainstream courses, we can see that only 4% is really standalone course, and the majority of the courses, they're integral approach. Different sectors are integrated in these climate change courses. I will give you now some examples. Now this is the master course with entry point sustainable development and environmental management. This is offered in Denmark. The course discusses different topics related to sustainability and environmental management. Of course, I cannot present all the 112 courses here. I only give you a brief overview. Now another course offered by Utrecht University in the Netherlands, to achieve an environmentally and socially accountable society. This is a standalone course on climate change offered by University of East Anglia, United Kingdom. It's more about climate history, present day variations, climate prediction. So this, I think this is a standalone course. This course is focusing on law and climate change, offered by Queen's University in Belfast, legal and policy frameworks governing the environment and wider sustainability agenda. So you can see that all the different master courses, they have different angles how they approach climate change. Then I was thinking, when we had our kick-off seminar in Indonesia, there was one person from study portals who presented his project that he did before for the European Union, and it was a project to develop a tool where all the European master courses and PhD courses are integrated in one tool. And this is really a tool for students and professionals to find a course and to find also a scholarship. So I thought, well, let me see what climate change courses are offered. So I went to the site of study portals. I looked for climate change, and I found out that, how many? 307 master courses in the European Union offer courses on climate change. I thought, okay, that's nice. Now let me see what is there, how many courses do offer courses that are on climate change and mitigation. Now it's only 19 master courses. Also address mitigation in the course. When looking at adaptation, one of the priorities of the European Union, then I found out that only 34 master courses say they integrate adaptation in their course. So I think, so the main question is now, do we think as a European Union that we have enough courses, master courses, that include climate change adaptation in their curricula? Now I go to the conclusion. I found out that most courses aim to learn students to cope with climate change and promote sustainable development in a master course. Almost all master courses are mainstream and learn students to integrate different sectors. And I also found out that the focus of the European Union is on climate adaptation, but only a small number of courses say that they focus on climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. So the remaining question for us is, do we think that these master courses in Europe prepare the next generation of policymakers and practitioners well enough for climate change adaptation and mitigation? So this is my question for the public. And of course, if there are any questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think from the fact that you have observed this complementarity among the different courses, we can easily jump to the conclusion that collaboration between suppliers of master courses in mitigation and adaptation is a key to offer better sort of preparation to policymakers, to students, and so forth. I think we really address here something that is in line with the needs of future generations. So I think it's really a very good overview. It helps us also to give a good direction to the next sort of sessions that we're going to have and see what the way forward will be for this network. Any other questions regarding master courses, educational programs, and so forth?
Yes, thanks, Rick. Your presentation, I think, provokes a number of questions. One of the most fundamental ones is, do we want to have standalone courses on climate change alone? Or should we rather integrate them with other, let's say, from a more diverse thematic approach, thinking, for instance, of sustainable cities. So what does it take to have a sustainable city? Should that have economic dimensions, but also environmental dimensions? So then that would be part of let's say, that particular course. It may not appear quite in the right way in, let's say, the lists produced in this in these kinds of portals. That's of course the question I cannot answer because I didn't do the analysis. You did the analysis. But I think the more fundamental question indeed is, are we looking for standalone courses, and if so, whom do they address? And secondly, should we indeed perhaps focus much more on integrating environmental studies within or climate change studies within, let's say, more regular mainstream courses? That would be the fundamental question.
Now, I only did an analysis, and this is my conclusion, but I think I agree with you that only standalone courses on climate change, I think they're not so useful. I think it's very important that students, they come in contact with different sectors, and we really have integrated courses and they look at climate change from different angles. Because the last decennia we had a problem that we have government employees working in the public sector, and they can only think about in their own sector. And I think it's very important that we, with our Lean CC course, that we learn students to look at climate change from different angles, from different disciplines. So I think, yeah, I agree with you.
But still on this issue of courses dedicated to climate change, whether this has sense or not. We are going to see a presentation by Carlo tomorrow afternoon about the PhD school here in Venice, which is actually dedicated exclusively to climate change and has a sort of sense because as a master course, second grade master course potentially, and this PhD course does, it collects students from different fields of studies, both from human science, so economics and so on, as from natural science, and brings them together in a course and introduces these elements of interdisciplinary, potentially of interdisciplinary work, and teaching to go beyond the limits of the own field of studies known up to then. So in this modular form of studying, which is being established in the EU, actually, you could also think of courses building up on first level courses from different disciplines, and this gives you the chance in a dedicated course to introduce also this element of interdisciplinarity, which is extremely difficult to implement. If you ever have worked in an interdisciplinary research project, you will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you. Of course, I'm from the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, so we train our students to work in the local government or to work in the private sector. So of course, that's different than when you do a PhD study, when you become a specialist on climate change. But I think, for my opinion is that I think that there are a lot of people working in local governments all over the world. They should know more about integrated approach towards climate change. So I think there are different needs for different education sectors.
It's always a question of how much resources you have. I mean, this is a discussion that we are having in the University of Venice, standalone or master programs and stuff. I mean, what we are now doing is we know it's the second best option. We are dedicating some standalone courses to climate change, and we really invite our students, whether they're economists or philosophers, to take those courses and make themselves all these different connections that you actually, the ideal situation would be to have a specific course, a master course on climate change and so forth. But that's not always financially sort of feasible. We have budget restrictions, as you were saying, also for the E modules and stuff. So I think very good integrated programs and stuff. And it's of course an interdisciplinary and transversal issue, but often we do not have the resources to do that. And then I think it's better to have a standalone course than not doing anything at all about this.
Thanks a lot. Rick, I think the presentation has brought out quite an interesting angle, even though you just focused on the EU context. If I look at where we are working in the developing world, and also especially in South African experience, it seems like there is always the idea that in the applied disciplines, you bring in climate change angle, and I really appreciate the way IHS has actually been tackling it, because initially we started it off like in the planning, city planning and architecture. We started it off with the whole idea of mitigation, and you start looking for the right technologies to mitigate emissions and all that, but with very limited foundations of the science and the facts of it. So we didn't necessarily always give enough information to the students as to why they must do mitigation for architecture, through architecture or cities. What I am now seeing, because of the activities that have actually arisen here out of LeanCC and out of the availability of information in the broader sense, there is then the growing interest to deepen that scientific understanding within the applied disciplines themselves, and therefore information is becoming more accessible now, and there is better appetite now for digesting that scientific information. So I think But the environmental sciences, and this is our experience in South Africa, the environmental sciences, your geographers, your physicists and all that, they are still continuing with the deepening their own scientific explorations and scientific inquiry. And my view really is that the processes will still have to go hand in hand simultaneously. And there is going to come a point, and this is one of the issues I might touch on my presentation, when actually we will see an interest in embedding basic fundamental curriculum, even at the first degrees in architecture, or first degrees in engineering, or first degrees in the other applied discipline. You have a core or a compulsory, module that looks at these issues, and it seems like that is where we are heading to now. But it seems like what the journey we have come through is where the environmental, the natural sciences have taken us up to the point of establishing climate change as a fact, and the science is there now. And then the applied disciplines seems to have come down with the idea that applications was postgraduate work and postgraduate research and all that in architecture, in engineering, and now it is coming down. And it seems like somewhere along the way we will have an opportunity to underpin all that in the applied disciplines with some very fundamental modules that give the actual facts of climate change with a more solid scientific understanding compared to what we were doing 20 years ago. Or and that seems to be the picture for me that is actually emerging with regard to the two of them, the convergence between.
Okay. I would have a quick question and a comment. The question is that I understand that this was part of the project, that you provided this overview of what is already out there in the terms of master programs and so on. Has this overview and also the interpretation and analysis of existing master programs, has this also shaped the design of your e-courses already, so that you took into consideration what is already part of these masters? That would be my question, maybe to you and also to Margareta.
As I said in the beginning of the presentation, the e-course was more intended to give access to these courses which were analyzed here, rather than be substitutes for them. It was just as an introduction to help to get into it. It's just a 2 weeks course which can just give an overview on these issues and help to get into these thematics rather than be a substitute. Yeah, each module was, okay. It's 6 weeks in all, but 6 weeks are not a master course.
Just a quick comment. I noticed, I went to Peru a few months ago, and I noticed how some institutes and university there, they don't really talk about climate change. They talk about environmental awareness and environmental management. So the programs that most of the universities are running are really still, but still very importantly about recycling, about sort of stewardship of your environment, so taking care of your environment. And I think that's something that we can't neglect. So, however, climate change is integrated. I think environmental management is a crucial entry point, because there's a risk that all that sustainable development tried to do is now overshadowed by climate change as something new, that there's no linkage. And instead, I think the linkage needs to be created and should be created through environmental management. Actually, we worked on a project on trying to embed the concept of climate change in city development strategies, and the sort of common sense entry point is environmental management. So I think I agree that we are probably leading towards a situation where we will have climate change as a fundamental subject, and it will become also embedded in architecture and economics. But then I think the entry point with environmental management should not be underestimated, because I think the linkage with sustainable development is currently not really there, or we're forgetting about sustainable development. And I think there is a way in which climate change can actually revamp the whole idea of sustainable development and make us understand what went wrong. I don't think it's a process in a way, no? I don't think sustainable development is a goal necessarily, or an end. It's a process, and I think we have lost a bit the connection with what we were trying to do with sustainable development at the moment.
Economics, it's about cultural aspects, it's about town planning and land planning, and so it is as such some kind of thing that has a lot of dimensions, which again points towards a multidisciplinary and integrated approach. So I think you're right, but just keep in mind that sustainable development is very complex and deals with a lot of different issues that ought to be tackled by different kind of experts.
Okay, concluding demand.
Yeah, actually, these issues of this, I would say, educational hire on the topic of climate change, not only standalone, but that is also the this development. I mean, occur in everywhere. I mean, not in the European country itself. Just I want to share some experience that we have so far in terms of the climate change. We in our institute in developing countries, we have the really strong networking with the European universities on the topic of the climate change issue. We developed the like a module of the climate change that we have done so far with LNCC, but we have also another network with the Center for Natural Resource Development, consists of 11 universities from Africa, Asia, and Europe. And we also developed this module related to the environmental issues as well as the climate change issues. So I mean, talking about the master program related to the climate change, we should also have a look our partner in the developing countries that they face different problem on the climate change issues. The problem is really typical and locally. So I mean, to have this understanding on the material on the educational program, not only the issues of the climate change facing in the developed country, but also in the developing countries also important. So that's why it might be in our next agenda that is important, also link it to Margareta, that we can see how many people actually participate on the master program of the online program from the developing countries. That what not so much the people involved. That's because there's some problem. I mean, like for example, we are still facing with the tools how to follow these online programs. In our case, that is the first. The second one also, the material itself. If we are talking with the climate change in the particular issue, we have the really local and typical topics on the climate change. For example, Jakarta, Semarang, and any other locals countries, they are facing different problems. I will later on also discuss about this in my presentation. So it means there is two things. First, our agenda for the next future is just spreading this material or spreading these topics into bigger topics, not only in the developed country, but as well as in the developing countries. That is.
Okay, thank you, Aris. Yeah, I think what we have also seen in the paper from the European Union, the little efforts are done at the local level on adaptation, and I think if you have the two, mitigation and adaptation, so mitigation are local investments, local efforts, but the benefits, they are not local. Well, in adaptation, you have local investments, local efforts, and also the benefits are also local. And what Aris mentioned, yeah, most of the problems are local. So I think with our different courses at the European Union, also in other countries of the world, we should really also take into account the local problems of our local cities and our local environment. Okay, that's thank you for your attention.
Well, I've been a lousy chairman. We're 20 minutes over time, but I hope my colleague is going to do better in the next 1 hour and 10 minutes before lunch.
If I may invite at least the first speaker already. So starting off with, we already heard your voice, Aris. So starting off with Aris Marafai, talking about lessons learned from international cooperation from the University of Gajah Mada with EU-based universities. So in fact, you've given us a short introduction already, which may perhaps head start us for this last session before lunch. Before Aris gets going, he's the Vice Dean of Research. And he focuses on community services and cooperation, doing so with the Faculty of Geography at the University of Gajah Mada, said before, in Indonesia. He's also head of the Master of Science program on management of coastal areas and watershed at the Faculty of Geography, and in fact, personally, I've had the great opportunity to join him in visiting one of the field sites that he focuses on in Semarang. So possibly he will use that as an example. As when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much, the chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. Not really very, but late good morning. Let me start with this 20-minute. Actually, I asked to talking about the lesson learned from our university in terms of the international cooperation, especially related to the educational and research on climate change in our university. Okay. The first 5 minutes, I would like to just give the information related to the climate change research agenda that we have developing so far with 2 cases of the study. And then later on, I will come up with some international cooperation related to the climate change study in a higher institution that we have so far. Let me start with the figure of our country, which is we are in archipelago, more than 17,000 islands, and for sure we have a lot of coastal areas, and due to that, one of the issue of climate change will be the facing in a coastal area for sure. For example, the issue of the sea level rise. If we see the figure, Indonesia is the number 3 of the champion of flood events, not only because of the rainfall intensity, but also because of the change of the rainfall intensity due to the climate change. If we see the Nichols and Mimura data as well, if the scenario of sea level rise really facing us, for example, with increasing of 1 meter, there is several countries will vulnerable of that issues, especially as well Indonesia with only 60 centimeter, we will lose around 34,000 kilometers square of our lands. But we can have look as well, the Netherlands will facing around 6% of the land, Germany as well, and Poland as well. So actually the issue of impact of climate change is already there. Let me start with the 2 case study. First of the Jakarta and our capital city, which is consists of more than 12 million inhabitants, and around 40% of the elevation is really low elevation, or I would say below high tide sea level. So it's mean in the next future, if the climate change increasing, the impact of the sea level rise would be worse in our case. And then combining with other aspect, which is the land subsidence, we have around 4 centimeter per year in general, but in particular places up to 26 centimeter per year of the land subsidence. Combining what with the sea level rise will create a very huge impact of the flooding on the city. Also, the third combining, we have discussed and have research combining with the increasing of the change of land use on the city. For example, in the Jakarta in 72, this the red one is the urban areas. They spread very well, very fast. I mean, up to 2005, almost entire the city now as a urban area that will give impact more safer to the sea level rise in the future. We have a model the sea level rise on Jakarta coastal area with a different inundation, and we will see that if we have the scenario of 188 centimeter or 2 meter, the flood area will be reached up to the Jakarta center. From that perspective, we can see that the issue of climate change is not standalone, but there's linkage to other aspects. For example, with the urbanization, with the social aspect, with the other aspect, as well as with the disaster and planning and etc. Then is one of our example how crowded the Jakarta with the several factor and not added with the factor of climate change in the future. That was our first case study in Jakarta, and the second we have also the study in Semarang city that also the are involved, and that's as well as now the student of Rick Haykop also there. 3 students now studying about the Semarang city. This figure give us the example. For example, in the figure A, this happen every day because of the rising of the tide, and combining with the subsidence as well. So we can see in the figure B, every day this house is inundated, and even in the figure D, we loss of the land due to the sea level rise. That was the land, but now it's being the sea because of this permanent inundation. That's occur because of this very extreme groundwater withdrawal from start from 2000 up to now. That's why now the level of the elevation is now sinking, and the water from the sea now become spread much more. That is the prediction of the elevation we made based on the groundwater calculation and rate. In 2010 was the blue one is the zero level, and up to 2020, for example, we can see that almost all the entire area will be inundated in the future. That is regardless the scenario of sea level rise. This is only the land subsidence itself. But in the future, when we have the rising of 2 meter or 1.5 meter, like in a scenario of the Nichols in Memura, there will be much more higher. This is just to give an example of the increasing sea level rise in the coastal area of Semarang. That is inundation area of more than 1 kilometers by 2011. And in other part, we have this inundation around 100 meter in 2003, but now that's area in 2009 permanently inundated up to that area. This is some issues actually in that area. Is the cultivation for the fish, etc., and all the people here are depend on that area, but due to this no permanent inundated, some of the residents should move from that area, and now still the big issue for the Semarang governance, who Sitabalok live actually in that area. Let us just give an example how suffers this area from this sea level rise. It was this, up to this land was land. Even this area was a residential area. One of the proof is like this. For example, this small square was as house. So now they really permanently inundated on this area. The big issue is how we then remove all the people and then give the another safe area for the people. That also another problem from us. That is just give an example how the sea level rise really problem in our case. They inundate the railways and as well as the roads in that area. This picture shows us the example of the impact of sea level rise. That was a road actually, and now this permanently inundated, and then we cannot use this building anymore. But still people, because the people fishing on the road, that's why they use helm. Okay, that is the two case study in our case, how the impact of the climate change are there. Based on this, let me speed up this one. Based on these issues, and then currently we have several activities with the European university and other university around the world to have the study on climate change issues. One of the example, if we are conducting the joint research and educational program on risk and resilience and climate change with the Cologne University in Germany. These activities consist of 3 years research, allow the student from Germany come to Indonesia to have the thesis and PhD as well as the bachelor thesis on the topic of the climate change issues, joint supervising with the professor from Indonesia, and that was really a very success program. The student not only learning how the impact of the climate change in the future, but also they are dealing with the interview and have the social aspect of the community, as well as has discussion on the field, for staying on the field for 2 or 3 weeks. And this is really very good experience combining the student from the European university and the student from the developing country like Indonesia. And then the second one, we have also joint research and educational program with the Netherlands, what we call it Jakarta Climate Adaptation Tools. This is funded by KVK, Knowledge for Climates from the Netherlands. The research on tools and capacity building for climate proofing of integrated spatial planning and flood risk management. That is a very good example how we combining some institution, for example, the Tiltares, the governance of West Java, the research center in Indonesia, our university in Bogor, and also KVK, Frick University in Amsterdam, Wageningen, and also, for example, the private company like Royal Haskoning are involved in that project. Now we are in the 3rd years, and next year is the last year, which is the result. One of the result is we produce 2 PhD student on that case. That is the example of the result of that project. Actually, we are developing the illustration on early warning system, on a flood control, on the watershed in Jakarta. And then another good example is the elective course that we have conducted which is climate and environmental change and their impact on livelihood, mobility, and regional development. It was conducted in 2010, I think, with Martin and Lothar as well. We have visited Semarang with our student. And then the fourth, for sure, our Erasmus Mundus program, which is the linking European, African, and Asian academic network on climate change. Actually, this really helpful and useful for us, not only for our student, but also to have an overview and as well as to have the really good networking with the European University on the topic of the climate change. And the fourth, we have also the master program, which is linked to the coastal watershed. Our master program is actually the double degree program, I would say. One with the Chiba University. It's mean every year we send 2 or 3 students to the Chiba, and other student we send to the Netherlands, which is the Twente University under the similar scheme. But then other student we send to the Center of the Natural Resource Development, which is funded by DAAD in Germany. And the remaining student, they following the single degree program. Again, related to the climate change, we have the workshop on CCIA, which is developing the curriculum of climate change, impact and adaptation in higher education, combining with the several universities from Egypt, Nepal, Jordan, Mexico, and as well as in Germany. That's also our experience to have this kind of module. This module should be finished by the end of this year, and we will disseminate and use this module for the partner university, which is from Egypt, Nepal, Jordan, Mexico, and Germany. Also, another good example is that we have the joint student project on climate change impact on urban landscape. We send our students to Nepal to have the field field study together with the colleagues from Nepal as well as the professor from Germany to have these activities on climate change issue. Last but not least, this is our network as well from the Center for the Natural Resource Development that I told you, consists of the 11 countries from around the world. And this will last on 2014, and then now we are applying for the next scheme funding for the next 5 years. Again, we have also related publication to climate change. For example, this consists of more than 20 publications in our faculty related to that issues. Also, we have published the book on the connecting delta cities, which is still related to the climate issue, funded by Kafika. Also, the book of the climate adaptation on flood risk and coastal city. And also now we have the Lean CC. That's all, actually, Lothar. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aris, also for sticking exactly to the time, so that it hasn't given us a head start, but at least we're still on time in a certain way. Let me give room to one, let's say, technical question, and I would like to ask for those who have, let's say, more overall questions to hold those back until we have had all 3 presentations. So I hope if you can memorize your questions, and that would be helpful. So if there's any clarification question to Aris for this moment. Okay, if none, Diana, can I ask you to come forward? Thank you very much, Aris. While we wait, let me introduce Diana just before we get started. Diana Marie Oleguer, and I hope I'm saying this right, I think this is a Spanish-derived name, is a program manager at the Manila Observatory, which is located within the Ateneo de Manila University and is also one of the partner universities of the Lean CC program. And she will then be providing us with an overview of the different climate change programs that are running at this moment in the Philippines, and possibly by extension also with other partners from around the world. So while we get the presentation on screen.
It's already noontime. Good afternoon. I'm Didi Olaguer. I'm actually from the Manila Observatory, and I work closely with Dr. Kendra Contanco, and I have her name here because I'm going to be also sharing her slides. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of climate change programs in the Philippines. So this was a slide presentation that she presented at the Lean CC activity in Manila, where she presented the climate change programs at the Ateneo de Manila University and the Manila Observatory, where I'm from. So as it was mentioned, the Ateneo, we're inside the campus, so we're actually a separate research institution inside Ateneo, that's Manila Observatory, and the university, since we work a lot with the students, that's the Ateneo de Manila University. So we at the Manila Observatory is where we do the climate change work, the climate change research. So you can see we've already had over 1 degree centigrade change in temperature over the years between the 1960 and about the year 2000. This will be significant later on. I'll show you a later slide. And our climate, our Dr. Gemma Narisma is in charge of doing the climate projections. Our climate studies divisions are. So you can see on one of the 2020 scenario that she has here, where there's a projection of increased rainfall in Metro Manila above here, and in the south decreasing rainfall, which actually has been happening. A lot of the power the power plants in the south have been having power outages because of the lack of water. So this is one consequence. And in Manila, we're seeing the effects of monsoon rains and increased water. So there doesn't even have to be a typhoon for us to be suffering from an extreme event, in this case that of rainfall. The Philippines, like Indonesia, is an archipelago. We've got a lot of hide and seek islands, 7,000 of them. And if you think of to the east, the huge Pacific Ocean as being that cauldron of water that you can heat, and if we know that the climate change problem is that of carbon dioxide increasing since the Industrial Revolution, mixing in the atmosphere, and therefore able to absorb more heat, that's why the Philippines seems to be the laboratory for typhoons. And then we're also on the ring of fire for volcanoes, so we also have that to deal with. So you name it, we've got the disaster there, which is important for how we deal with not just climate change, but disaster as it is. So it's very important to us. So extreme events, it's part of the fare that we have to deal with. So these projections are being done at the Manila Observatory. Already part of the change that we've seen in the Philippines is that before, when I was a child and we wanted to have no classes because of typhoons, usually when typhoons come in from the east, they would hit land, lose strength, and go towards the north. And usually it's the battered islands towards the north of the Philippines that we'd hear about. But more and more, if you look at the recent disasters, you'll see that here in this projection, you see increased rainfall in the south. We're seeing now typhoons having the energy to cross the southern Philippines. The Manila Observatory actually has existed since 1865. It's not that there never were typhoons crossing the south. It's just now they're stronger and they're causing havoc, which the residents of the southern Philippines are not familiar with. So if you're going to talk about climate change and extreme events, we're experiencing that. And the Manila Observatory was the original weather bureau of the Philippines. So we have climate data from 1865. And so that's why this chart here is supported by our data. It's very important. One last story. It's actually the Dutch businessmen who had asked for help from the Spanish government in the Philippines in the 1800s because the typhoons were wreaking havoc on their ships that were in Manila Bay, carrying their cargo, their business load. So so not only lives, but their business was imperiled. They asked for help from the Spanish government, which of course fell on the lap of the Jesuit priests who work as scientists in Manila Observatory. And so eventually the first weather forecast happened by a priest named priest named Padre Faura. Why is this important? They named a street after him. You must realize that back then, to be able to say in 3 days a typhoon will hit Manila and you can protect your business, more importantly, your life, this hit Manila people like it was almost like a godly thing to happen. So you have a street named after this priest. Look at these scenarios. This is the perspective which we want to look at. You want to have evidence-based decision support, but you want it to be based on science, and you're trying to build a scenario. But remember, we are trying to save lives. We're trying to characterize a hazard, try to reduce exposure, try to characterize vulnerability to reduce the risk from climate change effects. So I mentioned that as a perspective over the academic programs, which I'll very quickly go through in the Philippines. So the significance of a 1-degree change, it's hotter now at night. This affects the growth of rice. So for 1 degree centigrade change in the you have a 10% yield, a decrease. So you can imagine what this implies for food security. If you factor in the daytime temperature, you have an overall decrease of 15% in rice yield. So it's very significant for us. We already have a measured temperature change. So in the Ateneo de Manila, these are the various climate change related approaches now. We're trying to be interdisciplinary. So of course we have environmental science, and we have the bachelor's degree and the master's degree. And actually the atmospheric science, the master's degree, is based out of Manila Observatory, where we have the highest concentration of atmospheric physicists in the Philippines. And that's where the projections are done. Of course, science 10, we know all of this, what climate change impacts are on the potential areas. So we all know this. And of course, these are the research programs at Manila Observatory. It's the regional climate systems doing the research. Last week, the head of the LIS program talked about climate as being on steroids in the Philippines. If you think about it, the normal behavior of climate, and when you give something steroids, you have the normal function, but then it's altered. And so that's the way she characterized it. I think it speaks very well of what we're dealing with in terms of extreme events. Okay, so we've at Manila Observatory, we've done the initial national communication and the second national communication submitted to the UNFCCC. So that's our bit part for mitigation. I had a hand in working with the team for the second national communication. And so we're more and more, of course, given the history of, we have to be concerned with disaster risk management. There's slow onset from climate change, and there's the, of course, the quick onset from volcanoes and everything else. So, and of course, it has to be a interdisciplinary approach. And so we work also with local governments in trying to interpret the science, make it simpler, how to write it up, how to understand the numbers so that it has an impact for those who need to know and how they need to protect themselves. So, of course, students already can get involved in the research at Manila Observatory from undergrad up to their graduate level. And for future directions, of course, we want to make an impact, again, as I said, on the human dimension of the problem. And how do you deliver the message? How do you interpret the science so it's significant and understood? Just as Padre Faro was able to make his forecast have an impact on having science have an impact on daily business, daily lives, preservation of lives. Just launched last month was the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. Again, trying to have interdisciplinary research, trying to put sustainable development in a way that's understandable, and that's significant not just to the people in the campus, but to various stakeholders. my former staff member is now part of the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. So I just asked her, what's the update on academic programs in the Philippines as a shortcut. So she just gave me these slides. Of course, she has to talk about the Climate Change Commission, which is the overall body in charge of climate change matters for the Philippines. And from this Republic Act, you can see that it's mandated that we should integrate climate change into the primary and the secondary education curricula. So that's the ideal. And so they, as you can see, you can you want it to apply to science, biology, civics, history, etc. That's the law. Whether it's being done yet, we're still trying to mainstream. So that's the reason why I cite it here. And of course, the panel of experts from the president down to the various officials. Whether we're at a point that it's already something that can be applied is the question. But as you can see, the Department of Education Secretary has a key role in the panel of technical experts. There's a National Climate Change Action Plan in the Philippines. It's a document for the years 2011 to 2028. Adopted last 2011. I just want to point out where we're applying to education. The National Climate Change Action Plan wants to, of course, you have ultimate outcomes that they want, and in strategic priorities, of course, we all know food security, human security, etc. But we want the intermediate outcomes, also the importance of knowledge here on specific, like in food security. You want to integrate climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction in agriculture and fishery curricula, things like that. So a standard, that's why I'm not going to go into the details, but it's a desired outcome, but it's still being implemented. So for human security, the same thing is, and for knowledge and capacity development, the same thing, you want it in the curricula. Again, the update is, well, under a certain project in Region 6, this is the Visayas area of the Philippines, they're integrating, again, climate change into their curricula. And in Albay, where the volcano is, you know, that perfect cone volcano, and they've already been doing this since, I think, 2010 or 2011. And they're trying to already integrate climate change into their kinder to 12th grade curriculum. So they've been very active for years. And, well, the Climate Change Commission, this is their pitch for the youth. So they're being active there. Another association for the tertiary level is PATLEPAM. It's again this Philippine Association of Tertiary Level Educational Institutions in Environmental Protection and Management. They work with the Department of Energy and Natural Resources, the Environmental Management Bureau, in addressing higher level education. They've been trying to get the curriculum in, and of course, they want to put in environmental awareness, information exchange. They've been working for years, and well, yes, I can just read this, but the key thing to point out here from PATLEPAM, this is one of the example studies of trying for a specific university, again in Bicol, in Albay, the Central Bicol State University of Agriculture. Why I cite their case is that they have lessons learned in developing their curriculum. You need to involve your major stakeholders. You need monitoring evaluation. The modules must be prepared with the experienced stakeholders. Linkage development, and this is where programs like Lean CC would be important. You want to have resources not just locally but abroad. And you also must have your program accredited by, of course, the various government bodies within the Philippines. But what I'd like to point out is, in all of these development of the curriculum, are they characterizing the hazard? Like what I said, remember Padre Faura, are they based on climate studies, which is what Manila Observatory would like to do. We'd like to be able to also share how we do our downscaling, so that it's not just us doing this, but we can establish a consortium with other universities, so that you also have to keep updating this. If you're going to do adaptation, you're adapting to a local situation. So that's a question that I ask in this example that I've shown. What is it based on? And so that was just a very quick example for the Philippines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And of course, as a chair, I'm always grateful for people who manage to stay within their time, which is always a unique thing. And I speak for myself here. I don't know if there's any single technical question to add to your rather rich presentation. I think you shot us through a lot of information, and I guess most of the information was fairly straightforward, but it was rich because it gave us many different examples, and I guess we can come back to this in the discussion. So with that, let me introduce Daniel while we get your presentation uploaded. So Daniel Arura is with he works as a lecturer and researcher at the School of Architecture and Planning of the University of Witwatersrand. I've come to know him from the last seminar that we had, the last workshop we had at WITS, and in fact understand his particular multidisciplinary approach is also something important. I guess that he might reflect on also in his presentation for the fact that this might be the approach to take. He has extensive experience as a project manager in the field of sustainable green architecture and cities, and I know he's always on the lookout for, let's say, new developments in curricula. So I guess we should look forward to your presentation. And I hope also you will do me the pleasure of staying within 20 minutes if possible.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think it's quite nice for me that at least we had started introducing the context of approaches of climate change, primarily from the perspective of standalone programs versus interdisciplinary programs. I also like the idea that Veronica was bringing along with the idea of having started with sustainable development, can we keep with it even when we prioritize climate change? And the reason why that perspective is so useful is because within the applied disciplines like architecture and planning, we had gone far along the line with the issues of sustainable development with the socio-economic perspective, obviously with climate change as one context. And then that it has started to become clear that climate change needs a fairly focused and very well understood context. And what I'm going to present here is what I would really consider a very biased view, to the extent that I'm coming into it in terms of what their applied disciplines are actually experiencing, what they are going through. And if a similar presentation was done by a colleague of mine from the environmental sciences, they would obviously give you a very different perspective. So understand the context in which this comes from. It comes from an applied discipline perspective where we are active in the field, training architects, training planners, training a variety of other decision takers in housing and all that. But at the same time, like the way it has happened in IHS, you find that you are not always having the core understanding of climate change science, and you are always looking out to other opportunities of supplementing and complementing what you are actually offering to your students. So that is the context in which this one actually happens. And then from that point, I'll give you an overview of climate change in South Africa. We look at the scenarios and vulnerabilities, policies with regard to mitigation and adaptation, and then concluding that part with the whole idea of how contested the policy landscape is. And then another component will look at climate change and programs networks. And obviously, I'll keep a strong reference to my university, the University of Witwatersrand, and then the South African region. And it highlights very much that, the interdisciplinarity perspective, the transdisciplinarity co-creation of knowledge, that means with external stakeholders, national and regional networks and the international networks. South Africa faces a very peculiar situation in the sense that it is both in what you'd categorize as the culprit basket, and it is also in the victim basket in a big way. It is among the 20, the highest 20 polluters. It is globally ranked around number 18 in 2008, contributing close to 1.5% of global emissions. It's also among the top 10 emitters per capita at about 9 tons per capita in 2010. And economically, it is highly dependent on extractive industries, especially mining, and the fossil fuels, mainly coal for electricity, and liquid fuels, because arising out of apartheid days when South Africa was placed under sanctions, it evolved or adapted a German technology that used coal, liquefied it, and then extracted petroleum out of that. And that is still ongoing. So we take a lot of coal in both liquid fuel form and in electricity form. And then extremely weak in renewable energy and energy efficiency. We have possibly got the best solar resource globally, but also very weak in exploiting that in terms of actual technologies and the policy that needs to be there. Well, I won't be able to give you many of these kind of scenarios of what is happening with us. I liked that, the exploration that the observatory in Manila has actually been doing. Observatory work in South Africa has also happened, and from the 1960s again to the present, the tracking of where the temperatures are going, that has also happened. And there is a lot of data along that line, but I am just giving you a short here of a recent scenario within Cape Town, which has got a big part of it lying in low-lying areas of the coastal plain, and starting to experience, not that it is starting to experience, but this is becoming more and more severe. Some scenarios in terms of vulnerabilities with regard to temperatures. And as you can see, there is very, very high levels of confidence in terms of the temperature increases, especially going towards 3 degrees centigrade in the inlands, in the coastal areas, and up to 4 degrees by 2100, 2100. The inland areas could rise as much as 4 degrees centigrade. Equally, precipitation. We are expecting that a lot of the country will suffer from water shortages or lower rainfall, and that is what that scenario mapping is actually showing. And you can see even all the way right up to its coasts, there isn't much that actually is available with regard to rains and with regard to moisture. It's likely to actually decrease right across the country and the region. Okay, that just summarizes what those maps were showing. Average temperature rise 3 degrees centigrade to 4 degrees inland. Increased aridity, water stress, food security vulnerabilities. Sea level rise and flooding threats, especially for the major cities of Cape Town and Durban. And then the observed data trends since 1960 to date demonstrate consistency with these projected scenarios. Again, with regard to climate change policy, there is, you might recall that South Africa did host the COP17 event. That was in Durban, and there was a commitment by then to have a 30% reduction in emissions by 2020 and 42% by 2025. And there is actually policy frameworks that underpin this. There is a National Climate Change Response Strategy, which was formulated in 2004. And then there is a long-term mitigation strategy which was formulated in 2007. And what is in doubt with regard to how far we can go with this is the maneuvering space between emission reduction and the priority with regard to codependence for socioeconomic development, which makes these emissions reductions a little bit, puts them in doubt whether we can really achieve that. There are government structures that are aimed at doing this, but what we find is a fragmented kind of approach where portfolios for climate change fall within the Department of Environmental Affairs, while energy and green economy issues are in different portfolios. But we have got interministerial committees that are starting to look into this. This is possibly where I feel we have a kind of key interest in activities like LEAN-CC, because from a science perspective, we have got very good climate change scientists in South Africa. A lot of our scientists in environmental sciences, in geography, you know, even in paleontology, past climate, we are pretty good in terms of understanding this. But passing that knowledge to the applied disciplines, whether in architecture or in agriculture or in you know, business and all that, that is the part that hasn't started falling into place yet. So the expertise within our own university also treads this kind of a profile, where if you look at our Faculty of Sciences, we have got the best of scientists who are internationally active. But then in the past 5 years, mitigation and adaptation research at master's and PhD has started in several disciplines. I've got a group of master students working with me, PhD and all that. And we are looking at mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies from an urban planning and from an architecture perspective. If you come into the country now, we've got active programs in areas like green buildings and all that. So there is a lot of interest, but what you don't find is good enough backup of scientific understanding behind those initiatives. So we've got interdisciplinary climate change curriculum, which is not, which is emerging now, but it hasn't been established. And then I guess there is going to be a moment when you're going to hear a little bit more of the GCSRI, that's the Global Change and Sustainability Research Institute. I think Veronica might talk about it when we are looking at reviewing what we did in April. Okay, but I guess the more interesting one, which is giving courage to a lot of the things we are doing, is this South African Regional Universities Association. They have a program now, a 5-year program called Academic Climate Change Networks, where they are looking at embedding, helping the member institution, about 61 universities, to start embedding climate change across the curriculum in different years. And they have got, the theme they are adopting there is called Climate Compatible Development. And they want to work with that for the 5-year term or 5-year program. Teaching and learning networks, knowledge platform and hub, research network, institutional learning and development network, policy and stakeholder outreach. And you can see how some of these are now starting to line with LEAN-CC ideals. And this is an overview of those 5 program areas which they want to actually cover. And we are looking forward towards joining further and collaborating further with them on that. So that's all I didn't need to share with you. But as I said, I am giving this from an applied discipline perspective. And if a colleague of mine from WITS came and gave you a presentation from what they are doing in the sciences, or you'd really feel that it is a very different perspective. But what we are now trying to do from the applied discipline is to reach back and connect to that science and be able to give more fact-based kind of learning for our colleagues doing architecture, doing agriculture, doing engineering, and so forth. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and apologies for running away for a second. I hope you didn't miss me in the meantime. Well, again, I think we've come to the more or less formal end of this program. We're running slightly behind, but we've actually caught up a lot at the same time. We're 10 minutes past 1. We are going to have to really meet back here again at 2 o'clock. Because then obviously we're expected to be back in the program. So I guess we have about 10 minutes left for discussion or so. So let's give us ample room, because there was a lot of important issues were raised in these past 3 lectures, the past 3 presentations. So can I give the floor to anyone with questions, either addressed, and if you can indicate to whom you're addressing this, perhaps to all 3 or perhaps to a particular presenter, then that would be very nice.
Maybe just a reflection for Aris. I always think that trying to measure the impact of group work, like international group work, like the examples you presented, no? How much do international students or local students take away from these kind of interactions? No, you spend some time working with local communities, you work with peers from other universities, but it's sort of hard to see where that knowledge will go. You can, you do that in the best of your intentions, in the sense that you create the space for people to interact, but then how much of that, of what they saw, what they experienced, will go into their practice, into their work, and it's very hard to find out, to analyze, no? to sort of say, yes, this is our program has this impact. To the not necessarily just to the community, but to the students that are coming together and work on certain issues, because they then leave and the program is over, and so assessing the impact of this kind of interactions is very hard. Do you have any idea of if something happened after one of these programs? I don't know, one of the students came back with an idea for a project, or I don't know. And I'm saying this because when I studied at IHS, I only later realized that I had the opportunity to meet peers from other countries, and eventually I could have used their local networks to do my own thesis in another country. And I didn't do that. That was a huge opportunity for me to, if I wanted to work in Manila, I could have, there were people from Manila there, and I could have done that very easily. So I wonder how much people actually realize that they have opportunities there that they're not actually taking up.
For this question, let me give you one of the example. In our university, all the students of the bachelor program should conduct what we call it community services. So it is must that students should stay on the community for 2 months. They have to apply what they have according to their disciplines. For example, if I'm coming from the civil engineering, then I would help the people on maintaining drainage system, for example. If I'm coming from the geography, then I'm helping the local governance to mapping the area. The principle is that they should implement that what their knowledge. So combining this experience with the program of joint student program from a partner from foreign university, for example, then will allow our students to learn more from the community, but as well as for the, for example, foreign students also to learn from that community. That from this context, we frequently see that the student can create or develop something related to the real problem of the community, but not only on the climate change aspect. I'm thinking, I'm saying on the broad scale perspective. So as well as on the climate change issue, they just start with this one. I'm quite sure that in the future, that this combining the student is really give good opportunity from the student to learn directly from the reality on the field. Yeah? And that is from once they finish the study. Suppose they're working on the governmental aspect, then they can feel what they should do actually in reality with the people. And from the foreign student as well, that is actually good to see the other perspective as a lesson learned, as a local wisdom, I would say. For example, then in the future they can develop on that kind of on their knowledge and a scientific aspect, etc. That is maybe one of the perspective that solve the question.
Refer to the question of Veronica, in our department, because the background of the student is different, not just fresh graduate, but also from mid-career students. So they gain much from the curriculum, and then they implement uh, the curriculum to what they work right now. So depend on what I think the level of the students, so or the background of the students. Yes, thanks.
I think the question that Veronica is raising is a very critical question, particularly for us who do actually the teaching in areas like architecture, planning, and I guess it might be the same for those who do agriculture and those other applied disciplines. I don't know if it would apply in medicine and so on. But the point is that you reach a point where you feel a little bit disappointed to the extent that you feel that you are sharing and passing on this knowledge to your graduates. But you sense as well that when they go out and into practice, that's climate change and sustainable development becomes almost something that somebody will always have at the back of their mind and never to be a top priority in terms of how they advise the developer, in terms of how they advise the bank, in terms of how they advise the government with regard to policy. Instead, then, they find themselves carried more by the priorities of the ones they are supposed to serve, instead of them being the informed, mediators in the whatever. And I guess it is on that context that we have an entity in our case, and we will possibly talk a little bit more. When it comes now to our entities like research entity like the Global Change and Sustainability Research Institute, we are now partnering with other groups outside the university and going out to the stakeholders themselves and actually almost doing what our graduates should actually be doing with these stakeholders. I'm very active with the Green Building Council, for example, in South Africa. We are active with other partners like GIZ, trying to reach out to governments and all that to inform policy, because we are sensing that our graduates are not going out there with the sense of commitment we would have expected them to carry by the time they graduate. And we feel that there is a lot of time being lost as we wait for these graduates to reach a point where they can stand on their 2 feet. And so we are now actively pursuing interventions in terms of what we are calling transdisciplinarity, going out there and co-creating knowledge with other role players. And if we had time, we could have shared a lot more in terms of other programs we are doing with other partners. But the frustration is there. Our students are getting the knowledge, but they are not feeling empowered enough to actually drive the change with the kind of clients they serve.
I think we're talking very much about the difficulties we have working within universities with different kind of disciplines. We're talking very much about the difficulties we have linking different universities doing complementary stuff. What I also think is a very interesting issue, and you just mentioned it in your slides, is to involve other stakeholders, like big companies in the process, in the research and education programs. I've been just visiting Berlin, for example, where BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, not only German companies, are really taking the lead in shaping master courses, in shaping research and innovation kind of centers within the educational system of Berlin, both the technical university as well as the school for management are benefiting from these impulses. So I think one other issue that we might address in this meeting is how exactly, what kind of best practices we might have in getting the energies of private companies behind us, so that the people that we deliver to society convince the banks, or maybe the banks even before that convinced that climate change, energy, renewable energy are indeed very important. So just a suggestion to see whether these stakeholders kind of things can be an added value also if we want to continue with this program. I think it's really, really, really interesting.
I had one question, and that is international partnership, particularly from, that's the ends of, we've heard South Africa speak, we've heard Philippines speak, Indonesia speak, is the international, what's so particularly important about international partnership? So when does it become important to have this partnership? And is that agenda changing, let's say in the past decade, past 2 decades? Has that really changed? So what are we taking out of these kinds of international partnerships? I think if I can hear one of your voices, if you have a particular opinion on this, you're nodding your head, so I guess I'm welcome to respond to this.
I think for the students, the perspective of that the problem is real, and it goes beyond the Philippines. And what I've seen is that when the student sees that it's not just something local, of course everybody hears about it, but when they understand the perspective and the problems being experienced by various countries, I think it affects the way they try to look at looking at the local problems. It's kind of an inspiration, at least from my point of view. I see that, and maybe it drives them to sort of push them more to understand the problem, not just as a local concern, but something that they're addressing in a bigger context.
Well, I wouldn't be able to comment. I can only comment from the perspective of partnering with those who have possibly taken 2 or 3 steps ahead. Because when we were approached by IHS to be partners in this LIAN-CC, IHS had already collaborated in Europe around the same kind of initiative. And therefore, they were obviously trying to share with us certain lessons that they had picked up in the initial program. So I think that is what matters most, that when you are collaborating, it is useful that you understand what are the strengths and the weaknesses and where each of you actually complement each other in terms of where you, the journey you want to go ahead within the network. And for me, this has actually been a very useful learning experience, because I haven't got, even at WITS itself, the relationship between our school, let's say, and the environmental sciences school is not just as strong as the one we have in LIAN-CC. I am learning more of climate change issues with the LIAN-CC network compared to what I would be learning from my colleagues in environmental sciences or geography or the other more science disciplines, primarily because they have a certain perspective, they have a kind of a purity of discipline that they want to keep, and they also don't have the kind of time that and the resources that would allow this kind of face-to-face and this kind of sharing to actually happen. So the fact that there is at least a partner who is 1 or 2 steps ahead, experiencing what has actually happened and what could be done and how it can happen, I think that is quite useful. I wouldn't know what IHS gains out of this. I wouldn't know what our other EU colleagues are gaining, but from a VIT's perspective, that is a tremendous gain actually for us, so that we don't have to waste too much time in.
Thanks. I would like just to bring a little bit also the perspective from EU, that we see also a shift towards fostering more international collaboration and learning also by other experiences and cases. So it was very good example also, as you said, about the that the Manila Observatory works as a laboratory for typhoons. So this is quite a unique experience there, and I think many other regions could learn from that experience. So I think we see also a kind of shift also at the educational level, more facilitating exchange and sharing than just giving a Eurocentric perspective. And of course, we learn a lot by this sharing, so it's a mutually beneficial in that.
Okay, I will not say any wise words. We're in the middle of a conference. So let me end here and wish everyone a good lunch. And let's give one more round of applause for our 3 speakers, please.